Greetings, everyone. It's Gregg Bendian here with the ProgCast, where we discuss in depth all forms of progressive and forward-looking music. And today I am very excited to have with us a wonderful keyboardist and composer, arranger. He is known for his work with John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu Orchestra, as well as John's One Truth Band. But he's also worked with a bunch of other people like DiMeola, Freddie Hubbard, Alphonse Mouzon, Miroslav, Vitous, Wayne Shorter, Lalo Schifrin, Charlie Mariano. I could go on and on. We're going to get into all that stuff with him today. He's an award-winning film and TV composer. He's recently written a guitar concerto. So I'm very, very happy to welcome Stu Goldberg to the program. Hi, Stu.
Hey, Greg.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
You know, we've had some contact over the years. Obviously, people know you from your work with John McLaughlin and Mahavishnu, and many people know me from my work with the Mahavishnu Project. And you and I have had some correspondence over the years regarding the Mahavishnu music. And I want to talk about that a little bit later, but let's start by talking a little bit about who were the important pianists and composers for you coming up as a young musician.
Well, in my younger days, I was like a sponge. I wanted to hear everything. I was hungry to hear everybody. Of course, I was influenced by, Art Tatum, Oscar Peterson, Bud Powell, all the greats. I consider it an important lineage to study the work of the masters. And then, some of the younger guys, younger than them, Chick Corea, Keith Jarrett, the whole generation of wonderful keyboard players who played with Miles, Herbie Hancock, Bill Evans, you name it. Denny Zeitlin, I think, is an awesome, amazingly creative composer and pianist, and there's so many. We could talk for 2 hours about all the people I listen to. And my influences are kind of eclectic because, through my work with John McLaughlin and the people that he introduced me to and the music that he introduced me to, because I was pretty young when I joined the band.
How old were you?
I'm trying to remember. I was either 19 or 20.
Were you really?
Yeah. And so it was, very formative for me. And all of a sudden I was thrust into the international stage, and it was my first big gig doing anything. So it was amazing for me. And I met everybody and had all these influences. Through John, I met a lot of wonderful Indian musicians, and I was exposed to the Indian music culture. And I had quite a extensive study of that music. Never thinking that I would ever really excel in that, but just to expose myself, and I wanted to get hip to what they were into, especially the rhythmic sophistication of the Indian music concept is so awesome in its rhythmic complexity and the logic of it, the math of it.
Well, let's backtrack a little bit, because I know before that all went down, you are on the 1974 Air Pocket album with Chester Thompson and the Fowler Brothers. And
that's right.
I had Chester on the program recently, and we spoke a lot about that. That's such a cool album, produced by Oliver Nelson.
Yes.
What are your recollections of that band?
Well, it's an amazing story. That was actually an outgrowth of my college jazz band that I was a co-founder of with the Fowler Brothers. And we all wrote tunes, and we had a book of like 70 tunes, something like that, for 11-piece ensemble, various incarnations as some of the older Fowlers would go on the road with Frank Zappa, and we were in Salt Lake City. I should say I was going to the school at the University of Utah, where the patriarch of the Fowler family, Bill Fowler, who's no longer with us, amazing guitar educator and music theorist, and he was actually my counterpoint teacher.
Oh, cool.
At the university. But I met him and the Fowlers at one of these Jamie Aebersold jazz camps in I don't know, 67 or 68 in Seattle at the University of Washington. And Bill became a fan, and he asked me to submit an audition tape, and he actually got me a scholarship at the University of Utah in the jazz. And they had an amazing jazz program at the time. It was like a Renaissance era in Salt Lake City, of all places, which you wouldn't think to be a progressive hotbed of creativity, but it was. In 69, 70, they had a very creative modern dance department, incredible music department. It was unbelievable. And I met this wonderful inventor, musician, Nels Cline, he was the inventor of the EWI and EVI, which are woodwind and electronic valve instrument, electronic woodwind instrument. And he was a synthesizer developer. And I had been dabbling with synthesizers in the 60s with different inventors that I had met in the Seattle area. And so to meet Niall, he completely blew my mind with he was wiring together circuits and all this cool stuff. And this is long before mini moogs, any of that. These were modular systems with wires hanging out and circuit boards, going out to the ceiling. And anyway, this guy was amazing. And all this was happening in Salt Lake City at the time. And so the Fowler brothers, I'm sure you know about, the five brothers, each one a master on their instrument. And the oldest brother, Bruce, and I share a birthday.
Oh.
5 years, he's 5 years older, but, and I always remind him of that. But
yeah, the Fowler brothers are well known to people. Bruce as the trumpet player, Walt as a trombonist.
Bruce is the trombonist. Walt is Walt is the trumpeter. Bruce was featured, the North Texas State. He was on one famous recording where just an incredible musician. And he, completely surprising to me. I don't know where he got it, but he became the biggest orchestrator in town in LA. He's been Hans Zimmer's right-hand guy for 20 years. You look at his list of credits, it goes out the window. It's so large. So anyway, we had this band in Salt Lake, Blind Melon Chitlin. And we had a book of 70 tunes or something like that. And we kept it going through various incarnations as some of the Fowler brothers, Bruce and Tom, the bassist, went to join Frank Zappa, and later Walt did. And but anyway, we had various incarnations of Albert Wing, incredible sax player, and we had this book of tunes. And later, when I moved to LA after graduating, a lot of the guys were in LA, and I'm not sure how we got the gig with Oliver Nelson. I think Bill might have set it up, the father, Bill Fowler. But Oliver Nelson produced that. It was for East West Records, a Japanese label. And we recorded the tunes that we had in our book, or 7 of them or 8 of them, several of mine and some from Bruce and Steve. Unfortunately, is no longer with us. Steve Fowler. That was that album, The Air Pocket, with Chester Thompson on drums, who they had been playing with Zappa.
Yes, and it's such a great project. What was it like working with Oliver Nelson?
Well, we barely met him, to be frank. He just came for the session. It was done in one afternoon. Well,
you guys were so together and prepared by that point.
We were very prepared, although at least I'll speak for myself. I wasn't studio savvy at that time. It was I think it was my first album, 1974. And so some of the dynamics were like beyond what the recording equipment at the time could reproduce. And but he was great. Oliver was very supportive. He was very supportive of us as composers and as players. And what a legend. What an amazing body of work.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the first African-American soundtrack studio composers. Brought in by guys like Quincy Jones, who were pioneers in that regard on the LA scene. There really weren't a lot. So Oliver Nelson ended up working on Ironside and $6 Million Man.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's so great to have had a chance to work with him. Now, did you go directly from doing the Air Pocket project to working with Mahavishnu? How did that come about?
No, there were several months in between. So I graduated university and moved to LA to seek fame and fortune, which wasn't that quick in coming, although, I mean, relatively, I guess it was rather quick. But I was working to support myself every night in bars, piano bars, and I had a trio with a singer and a drummer, and I was playing Moog bass and piano and a drummer, actually a wonderful drummer, John Hernandez, who became Oingo Boingo's drummer later. But in any case, and I was, during the day, I would go to all these different rehearsal bands. I was driving around town with my electric piano, setting it up, and I had a rehearsal band with Don Ellis, and I did a bunch of I was on his last concerts with his big band before he passed.
Oh, we have to talk about Don Ellis. I mean, his name comes up so often in terms of progressive music and in terms of his work with odd meters and a kind of complexity in jazz.
Yeah.
What was that like working with Don Ellis?
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, the guy had he had an incredible book of tunes, and he had all the best players in town. And I was brand new in town. He was very gracious in welcoming me to the band, and we performed. Frankly, I don't have a list of it, but there were probably 4 or 5 gigs together, and these turned out to be his last concerts before he passed.
Wow.
But yeah, what an innovator.
Oh, completely. And a lot of people don't recognize him as one of the founding fathers of progressive jazz. But I mean, certainly he took it into a direction that was influenced by Balkan music and all sorts of complex rhythmic structures. Were you familiar with that kind of stuff before you got in the band? Is that what made you ready for it?
Well, I wasn't unfamiliar. Yeah. I mean, I'd of course heard his recordings. There was a famous, I don't know if it was at the Monterey Jazz Festival, a live recording. He had this tune, Indian Lady, in 7 or 5. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. But he was, I was familiar with his music, and I just kind of lucked into it because I was on the scene. Like I said, I was very actively trying to network and meet players and musicians and get my music out there. I was, working by night as a bar musician, and during the day I was trying to get gigs and meet people.
Who else was on the Ellis band?
God, I'm trying to remember. Now you're really taxing my memory. This would have been 74, mm-hmm. Something like that. Well, Dave Krieger was on drums, who I later hired on one of my albums. Incredible drummer, and especially in all the odd times. And I mean, the guy was, it didn't matter what time his signature, he swung hard, and it was completely adaptable. I don't want to do anyone a disservice by not remembering their names. Anyway, it was an incredible band. It was a full big band, but my memory's scant.
So how did you end up getting the call from McLaughlin?
Long circuitous story. When I had my band in Salt Lake back with the Fowler brothers, and some of them had joined Zappa's band, Zappa's band was coming on tour to Salt Lake City, and they were going to do a concert in Salt Lake. So I was always kind of enterprising, and as a member of the student body at the University of Utah, it entitled me to have access to rent some of the spaces at very cheaply, performance spaces. So I scheduled a concert in the afternoon of the Zappa concert, and the whole Zappa band came.
You really are.
I am
very crafty.
Unabashedly self-promoting. So,
but that's quite the move. So they all came.
They all came, and George Duke was in the band, and he was incredibly gracious. The late George Duke, a wonderful musician, and he was a big inspiration to me before he joined Zappa. All his collaboration with Jean-Luc Ponty and
Cannonball.
And then Cannonball and all his solo stuff. And he and I were actually on the same label, the German label MPS. Great musician and innovator. And anyway, he warmed up to me, and we had wonderful conversation. He said, if you ever come to LA, look me up. I might be able to get you a gig. So I said, wow, fantastic. Of course I will. And I did. And he did. So we were in LA and in the middle of nowhere. And I didn't ever think anything was going to come up. I mean, of course, I had told George Duke I was there, but I was doing, for months, I was doing these bar gigs at night and hustling during the day in rehearsal bands. And I was working at a hotel bar in Anaheim, and I was living in Santa Monica. And so it was maybe an hour and 15-minute drive every night. I'd get home at 3 a.m. And I came home at 3 a.m. one night from my gig in Anaheim. And I had we had phone message machines in those days. They weren't voicemails, tapes. And there was one, I had a message from John McLaughlin, whom I had never met, in a very dignified English accent. And he said, hi, Stu, George Duke gave me your number. I'm in LA looking for a keyboard player. Gail Moran had just left the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and he was planning a big tour with Jeff Beck's band. Right. And he was traveling the country looking for a keyboard player. And he happened to be at a certain hotel, and he told me where he was, and he wanted me to call him, and he wanted to come and meet me and hear what I can do. So this was 3 a.m. And I think I was 19. I'm sure I was 19 at the time. And I said, God, what's the appropriate time to call somebody back? Not 3 a.m. So, I mean, of course I didn't sleep a wink. And at 7 a.m. I couldn't control myself anymore. So I called his hotel. And of course, with most musicians, that would have been sacrilege. But he happened to be up because he was into this meditation at the time. And he was probably still on East Coast time like you are. So it was for him 3 hours later. But anyway, 7 a.m. he was wide awake. He said, oh, fantastic. George Duke was raving about you. I really want to hear what you do. Can we meet? And I gave him my address, and he drove out in a rental car to my little pad in Santa Monica. So in steps John McLaughlin. And I had all my little keyboards that I had at the time set up, and I played some stuff for him. I played a couple tracks of mine that I'd written on that Fowler Brothers collaboration, the East-West Air Pocket album, which he was very impressed with. And, I played my Moog synthesizer, and I had a clavinet, and I had a piano, and, Fender Rhodes and all that kind of stuff. And he was very gracious, very sweet. Strangely, he seemed most interested in the books in my library. So he's like looking over, checking me out by what I read.
Right.
And I happened to have a book that I had been reading, autobiography of a yogi, Paramhansa Yogananda, and he seemed very taken with that. Oh, you're interested in Indian philosophy? I said, I'm open to it. I'm fascinated. I'm certainly no expert, but anyway, he seemed taken with that, and he was very non-committal. He said, well, I got a lot of other people to hear. So, I'll be in touch. And he took off, and I just said, wow, what an amazing meeting and how wonderful. And I never thought anything was going to come out of it. And that night I went back to my gig in Anaheim, and surprisingly enough, this is like a Hollywood story, but I was fired. I was fired that night. So now I had no gig.
Why were you fired?
I was fired. The singer kept saying that I was feeding him the wrong chords, which was of course not true, but he had a little problem finding his pitch center, let's say. Anyway, he fired me, said, okay, so I lost this gig, and I come home, and the very next morning I got a call from New York from John McLaughlin's road manager. It said, we're going on the road for 3 months. John wants you in the band. We're leaving a ticket for you at the airport. Come right now. And that was it.
Literally, like Elliot called you at the last minute?
But it wasn't Elliot. It was Joseph Deanna. But
oh, Joe, right? Okay.
Yeah. Elliot's a great guy. He's a pal too.
And Joseph too. And those guys have over the years come out to see us and playing the Mahavishnu music and tell us stories. And man, so you were 19 on the road with the Mahavishnu Orchestra.
So we rehearsed first, I came into the rehearsal at SIR Studios in New York, and there was Narada Michael Walden, and he played so loud. I'd never heard a drummer so loud in my entire life. And I'd heard a lot of drummers. He was so loud, they had a plexiglass, he was in a plexiglass box Nobody could take it. It was so loud.
Well, and there's also strings on stage, right?
Yeah, it was an 11-piece band. There was a string quartet, I believe, and a saxophone, and the core violin. Stephen Kindler was playing violin, who's an amazing musician. I've lost touch with, but I think he's still out there doing stuff.
He is.
A few years ago, I heard he had done some new age things or something like that. But yeah, I've lost touch with him. But what a wonderful player and a great pal. We had some great fun on the road.
I think he's also worked with Kitaro recently.
Okay.
Yeah, he's definitely out there doing it. So at that point, when you're coming into Mahavishnu, it's sort of the last leg of the Visions of the Emerald Beyond tour.
Correct. That was we were touring, supporting that album.
Right. And then Jean-Luc had left.
Yes.
So Kindler comes to the front, and I think it
killed it every night, killing it. Nobody knew. I mean, the guy was a great improviser. I'm sure he still is. I mean, the guy was incredible, and he had all these chops that be ridiculous, like concerto chops.
Oh yeah, intonation, all the Indian stuff, and then of course he went on to work with the great Jan Hammer group, so he was featured in that.
Yeah, he was, and Fernando Saunders and Tony
Smith.
Yeah, Tony Smith. Yeah, incredible.
Yeah, so you came in, and it's funny. When I spoke with Jean-Luc about that band, he also mentioned how loud Narada was.
Holy man! And the guy was like he was a force of nature.
Yeah.
And what a talent! Even back then, this is long before he became the big producer. He had such a talent and an innate sense of what was good and what wasn't. And when we were doing the Inner Worlds album, the summer of that year, actually, he was like the closet producer.
Oh, really?
Not so much a closet producer, but he was in on every decision and had all kinds of ideas, and he was overdubbing all kinds of cool mallets and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and he has a lot of composing credit, I think, on that album too.
He wrote it. Well, there was a tune, "The Way of the Pilgrim." I think he had 2 or 3 tunes on that album.
Yeah, and sang.
Yes, always was a singer. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was before we get to Inner Worlds, and I do want to talk about that, but so what's the situation with Mahavishnu on the Jeff Beck Blow by Blow package that's going out? Yeah. How long was that tour, and what was the material you guys were playing?
Well, like I say, we were supporting the Emerald Beyond album. So that's the material we were playing.
Only that stuff?
Pretty much, I believe it was only that stuff. I mean, there was a lot of great material, and that was the book that he had for that ensemble with 11 pieces. So that's what we were playing, and Jeff was doing his blow by blow material. Right.
I was always curious though if John had, because I don't know if I've heard any recordings of that final Mach. Well, we call it Mach 2, but it's sort of Mach 2B because it's different than the original second lineup, but. But what older material would have been arranged for the strings and the horns? I always was curious about that.
I don't think there was.
Yeah.
Not long after that tour, he disbanded the 11-piece band and we became a quartet.
Right. So the 11-piece band is touring. Any memories of Jeff Beck joining in?
Oh, we would have jam sessions at the end almost every night. And, it was very collegial. Bernard Purdy was playing drums, and what a master. I mean, you're a drummer, so every night it was just, it was the greatest.
It's another Teaneck guy, actually.
Is that right?
Yeah, Bernard's son was on the basketball team at our high school. Cool. So I remember, having him around town growing up in Teaneck. But yeah, that's right. And there's famous stories of Bernard running up Jeff Beck's credit card on the tour and living the life.
I wasn't privy to that, but it doesn't surprise me. There were all kinds of illicit activities going on. That's for sure.
Oh, it must have been wild.
It was totally wild. It was one big free for all from when I joined that band. I can tell you a million stories. It was.
I'll take a few.
It was. Abuse on the road. It was amazing. This was my first tour, and I started at the top, so I was really, really fortunate. And I was really straight-laced, just trying to do my gig and play those parts, which weren't easy to come in on. And because all those guys had been on the record, I wasn't. So yeah, it was, but Jeff played great every night and partied hard after and before probably. And John impressed me right from the beginning with his dedication to practicing. I mean, the guy would practice day and night. He would practice at the, before the sound check, after the sound check, after the gig, on the way to the hotel, in the hotel lobby, whatever. And it was never just strumming. He was always doing something really difficult and that didn't particularly lay well on the instrument, just to push himself. He was always pushing himself beyond what anybody could do. So like playing lines that would start on this string and then up stroke on the other string, and weird cross string picking wacky things, trying to get him even and all up and down. And he was always practicing, and I was so impressed with that. Every time I saw him, he did that. For all the years I was with him on and off for 5 years, and never rested on his laurels. Was always hitting it hard, no matter what.
I've seen John do his pre-concert warm-up, and it's pretty remarkable because he starts very slowly, and then you come back after you've had dinner, he's still in there warming up.
Oh, the guy,
he's blazing.
He's woodshedding forever. I mean, the stories they tell about Coltrane, how he used to practice all the time, that's John. Same kind of devotion.
And of course, he was hugely inspired by Coltrane.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
So you felt comfortable right away in the band, or did you always feel like you had to prove yourself?
No, they were very welcoming. Narda was great. Ralph Armstrong. I mean, they all hung with me. I mean, I came in. Of course, I was on my best foot forward. Always. I mean, you got to be when you're with players of that caliber. But I had, I'd been playing for many years at that time already, so I wasn't daunted by it. I just came out and did my thing, and they were appreciative. And we were experimenting, so cool. We had all these wacky time signatures that John was famous for. And I was experimenting sonically. I had this big synthesizer that my buddy Niall had made for me from Utah that I told you about.
Well, this is the Steiner Parker synth?
Yeah. Niall had made, pardon? It's like a modular, it's like a Moog. It was his version of a big modular patch cord synth that he had built an interface, a custom interface to my Mini Moog, so I could use the Mini Moog as this is way pre MIDI. So I was using the Mini Moog as a controller, and I had all kinds of gizmos and gadgets and kludgy modifications that he had done for me. So I was experimenting with a lot of sonic things, not just melodic and harmonic and rhythmic things, but also sonic things that were different. And John was too. He had this pitch, frequency shifting ring modulator thing that he would play through that distorted everything and made everything wacky and crazy. And he was trying to get to the sonic experimentation as well.
It's interesting. John is probably his most experimental on the Inner Worlds album, but he did start using that electronica on the way home to Earth from Visions of the Emerald Beyond, and
he was deep into it. I mean, I think secretly not so secretly, he wanted to be able to do what keyboard players could do on the guitar, and the technology was just 30 years behind. I mean, now he can do it, which he did on his recent collaboration album with Shankar, the vocal album they just did.
Mahadevan, yeah.
Yeah, Mahadevan. But back in those days, it was real kludgy and wacky. He had this special guitar made that had 6 different conversions, one for each string, and each one went to a different Mini Moog, and he had a custom panel of 6 Mini Moog. Imagine how out of tune that was. 6 different Mini Moogs, and he had one guy, a tech, his only job was to tune that thing all day long.
Really?
Yeah.
So you guys are in the trenches of early synth work.
Yeah, it was really exciting. it was exciting musically, harmonically, rhythmically, and also sonically, because we were trying to do things that were different, that had not yet been codified, and it had not yet been really developed. The technology wasn't quite there, but we went there anyway.
You know, Stu, you're the perfect guy to talk to about this, but it always struck me that all the hassles that you guys went through to make sounds, rubbing two wires together, or you know, two sticks together in the woods, but everything becomes codified as we go to digital. But I always say to my production students, what is gained, what is lost?
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about the transition from modular, and I call it really the homemade synth sounds, to the presets and to the DX7 and all of that. Any feeling about that? I know you probably enjoyed the convenience, but sonically, how do you feel?
They're all, for me, they're all tools. I can't say one is better than the other. I mean, it's great to have, I like presets. It's great to be able to save things and have them come back the way you intended them. And it's also very exciting to have the element of chance and randomness of when you plug things in and they're analog and it's different every time. And you really got to know your instrument to be able to tweak and make it what you want, because it's not going to be the same. Even if you leave everything plugged in, turn it on tomorrow, it's going to sound very different. So they're all valid expressions. You know, they're tools. You just got to know how to use your tools. I mean, I love all the advances of technology. I mean, now we can do everything in the box.
Yeah. I
used to need a room full of refrigerator-sized racks of who knows what, and now I can do it all in the box. So I love the technology. I'm not against it. I'm a fan. For me, it's all about the expression and the content, and you know, if you're expressing true emotion and communicating to your audience, that's what matters to me, not the technology of how you get it to them.
Dig it. Yeah. So then I didn't realize how compact that era is, where you go in the same year of 75 from touring with Mahavishnu to the group changing over to the final quartet. And can you tell me a little bit about sort of what John was into at that time, what's going on within all of your careers, and how that transition to the Inner World sessions happens, because now it's a smaller group, and even the material, I think, changes.
Oh, it totally changed. I mean, you know, like I said, when we started on that Jeff Beck tour, we were supporting the Visions of the Emerald Beyond album and that material. When he disbanded that group and we became a quartet, you know, my role became that much bigger, because now I was the second soloist. So I had melodies, I had harmonies, and I had a lot of solos that I hadn't had in the bigger group. And he changed material right away to some of the older stuff, some of the early Mahavishnu material, which was fantastic for me. What a joy to play that. I mean, like you, what a joy to play that material, and to play it as a quartet. So I was the second lead, so I was doing all the harmonies and all the leads together with him on the mode, while I was accompanying on the Rhodes keyboard, and it was great.
That must have been challenging, though, to play quintet music as a quartet. So no violin now,
right?
And you're playing melodies, soloing, and trying to play the ostinati that go on in those pieces. Right. So that's a lot to do.
It was a great challenge, and we just went for it.
I've heard one bootleg of that tour. Well, I'm curious, how many dates were played after the album came?
I don't know. Somewhere I have a list of dates. Somewhere.
But it was small, right? Because it ends pretty quickly after that.
Oh, well, I wouldn't say it was small. I mean, it was. I think that the first tour with Jeff Beck was in the spring, I believe, and this was maybe in May or June. I don't remember of that year that we became a quartet, and we toured all over Canada and the States.
So I have it wrong then. So you tour as a quartet before you record Inner Worlds.
Oh yeah. I mean, probably 60 or 70 dates. I would think we were all over we were always on the road.
And it was just Intermounting Flame, Birds of Fire, right?
Pretty much. Yeah, that's right. And we did a huge tour in Europe before Interworlds. Huge one we had a private old prop plane with all these rock bands. I mean, what a scene, man. We would play these big festivals for 60,000 people outdoors, and we would go on at 3 a.m. or whenever it was amazing. So we did a lot of dates with the quartet before the Interworlds album.
Oh, so at that point, what's the electronica like on the tour?
Well, I had my Moog and my custom Moog with the Steiner Parker, and John was trying to his 6 mini Moogs, but that was tough on the road. But
one mini Moog on the road.
No, he had 6. Yeah, but anyway, maybe one would work. and he had his ring modulator thing, which was easy. And no, we were doing it. We were going for it.
I should say, when Interworlds came out in 1976 January, I was 13 years old, and it was on the radio in New York on WNEW FM, a mainstream rock station that would play all sorts of progressive music. And I fell in love with that album, and to this day, I think it's got some of your and John's and Mahavishnu's best stuff. Certainly, as someone who's a big fan of outside kind of stuff, that album goes from the most beautiful crystalline consonant acoustic to the most adventurous and just brash noise making on Miles Out and Inner Worlds, and to me that almost puts a cap on the whole era of jazz rock exploration, because I don't think anyone went as far out sonically within jazz rock than that Inner Worlds record. That's just my opinion. And I love that record. I mean, the vocal tunes are beautiful, and the funk tunes are great. The writing is great. And you contributed the Inner Worlds chord sequence at the end, didn't you?
Yeah, part one was
part one.
Yeah.
So that must have been an interesting time too, to be in the studio. Did you guys have material coming in, or was that kind of created on the spot?
No, it was kind of a mystery. We didn't. Well, John probably did, but I wasn't privy to it. We showed up at this big castle in Aéroville, a suburb of Paris, Chateau de Aéroville, and that was the where Elton John did the Honky Chateau. That was the famous claim to fame at the time, and we stayed there for several weeks. We lived and recorded there, and as I remember, famously, Narda took a week to get the drum sound.
A week, wow!
An entire week. This was back in the days with keypexes, and you had your gates and all kind of stuff on every drum, and you had mics all over the place. They spent a week miking the drums. I don't know.
But what a great drum sound.
No, I'm not knocking it. It was just a different process. Before or since, I've never done anything that took a week. But that's what they did. And John had the material and came in with the material. It was new at the time for me. I don't know if they'd been working on it. I think some of the songs, some of the vocal songs, they must have done between Nard and John together prior. Or maybe they did it. I took off when they were spending a week on the drum sound. I went to Paris and hung out.
Yeah, right.
So I wasn't there for all of that. So anyway, they had this material, and we just went for it. And we did an amazing duet version of Albinoni's Adagio in G minor. John and I played organ, and he played. It wasn't on the album. Didn't get on the album, but. John said, I love this piece so much, I really want to record it. And we did a duet version, but it was never released.
Oh, wow. I'd love to hear that someday.
I don't have it. It's in the ether somewhere.
Yeah, it's lost in the Sony vaults like so much other.
They must have it. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So what was going on in terms of how that stuff was tracked when you were involved?
I don't have a clear memory of it. Most of the time we played live.
You did?
Oh, yeah. And I think the solos for the most part overdubbed. I mean, we would do a live version, and then particularly John's solos, he would work hours on them, perfecting them. It had tremendous striving for perfection. So he would do something live, and then he would say, "Well, gee, I can improve this or that or the other or whatever," and he would overdub for a long time.
And producer engineer on that record was Dennis McKay?
Dennis McKay, yeah.
McKay, yeah. So what was it like working with him? He's on so many great records.
Oh, it was wonderful. He didn't editorialize much. I think he just stayed in his lane and let John take the lead. But it was a wonderful experience. I remember there was a tune, All in the Family.
The opening track, yeah.
Yeah, the opening track, and I did what I thought was a really cool Rhodes solo on that, a very extended solo, but nobody liked it. And they kept saying, "Come on, you can do something different or something better or something whatever." And I don't know what they didn't like about it, but they didn't like it. So we ended up going into the studio to Abbey Road in London several months later. We were still on the road on this European tour, and they booked a session, and they said, John said, "I want you to play an organ solo." And I was kind of pissed off because I'd liked what I'd done.
Yeah.
So that kind of comes out in the solo, and it turned out to be a good solo, and it worked great for the album. But that was not cut live. That was an overdub at Abbey Road a month or so later.
You know, I was always curious if you felt Jan Hammer's presence when you were playing that music. Was he important to you?
He was a great inspiration. I mean, I got turned on to him when he was with Jeremy Steig.
Wow, yeah.
That they did, and I just thought he was so creative and had such a wonderful voice I mean, I loved the Eastern European harmony and melody, that the tradition that he had, the soul of Eastern Europe that he brought to the music, and his bending technique on the Moog was so impeccable. And I remember coming up, and I wasn't ready. I'll be the first one to cop to it. On the Inner Worlds, a couple of years later, I was, but on Inner Worlds, it was pretty lame what I was capable of with the mod wheel. And then I went and woodshed, and I spent, I don't know, like 3 hours a day playing scales on the mod wheel. And then I got it together. And when I joined the One Truth band later, I had my shit together with the mod wheel. But Inner Worlds time, I was a novice.
No, I play with enough keyboard players to know exactly what you're referring to. You can certainly abuse that wheel, and you can certainly misuse it.
Just to do it for expression, but it's not in tune. It's just awful. I mean, it's shameful, really. So it was actually David Sanchez who hipped me to this cool thing in the Mini Moog where you could take there's a physical detent in the pitch bend. There's a physical thing. You can take that out and tune put the whole thing down to the bottom, the wheel down to the bottom, and now you have an entire octave of bending, as opposed to maybe half an octave with the wheel in the middle. Anyway, so I did that, and I recalibrated, retuned the thing. And like I said, I practiced 3 hours a day for a couple of years playing scales, just holding down one note and playing scales on the mod wheel.
Oh, wow.
Getting so I could jump to any interval within that octave in tune, and then multiple melismatic lines using only the mod wheel and holding one note down. And that's how I got it together.
So it was like a combination Ons Martineau and Theremin.
Well, sort
with
of,
a different activator.
A different technique, but I mean, exactly. Complete gliding between. There's no detents. There's no tempering. It's like wherever the thumb goes, that's where the pitch goes.
And it's all ear, really.
Well, it's ear and technique, but the same thing on a fiddle or on any unfretted instrument. Yeah, you gotta be able to find the note, and it's ear.
How long were you guys in the studio for Inner Worlds?
I'm trying to remember. It seemed to be like 3 weeks or almost a month, or at least 3 weeks, it seemed like.
Were you happy with it when you were done?
Well, I was thrilled. That was my first big project I'd been associated with. So of course I was thrilled. And, to have the luxury, I don't think they have recording budgets like that these days. Of course not. There are no recording budgets anymore. But to have a recording budget from a major label that allows you to spend a whole week just on the drum sound, just moving mics around for a week. And then all the overdubs, every technological thing that was possible at that era of 1975, we did.
How many tracks?
I wasn't that technical at the time. I assume it was a 24-track analog, tape machine. It might only been 16.
It might have been 16 in 75, yeah. Or you could chain two 16s together.
Yeah, I frankly, I don't know, but I know that we used every track we could, and if there had been slaved out to another machine to gain more tracks, I'm sure we did that too. I mean, there were a lot of overdubs. There was a lot of production.
Yeah. But it seems like, were there tour dates after Inner Worlds came out?
Oh yeah. We toured we were still on we did this big European tour with all these rock bands.
Who?
10 Wheel Drive, or 10 years after, and the Scorpions, and I'm trying to remember big names at the time. I mean, Alvin Lee, I believe. Boy, you're taxing my memory, pal. Anyway, we were performing to, like I say, 50, 60,000 people every night in big outdoor stadiums. We played this famous festival in Orange, France, near to Avignon, and this old Roman amphitheater late at night. I think we went on at 3 a.m, and they had to postpone our set 3 times because it was raining. And everybody was super scared that John was going to get electrocuted, because that year a guitarist had died in Finland at a outdoor festival, when he was touching the guitar and touched his mouth to the microphone in rain, and he had died because they didn't have it grounded right or whatever. And we were all scared that somebody was going to. It was a weird scene, but it was great. The music was great.
So how did it come to an end?
That band?
Yeah.
John had been pursuing this Shakti group, which wasn't called Shakti at the time, but for several years prior, that was his biggest passion.
Yeah.
And he also had a change in his personal life. He had been a disciple of Sri Chinmoy, and he wanted to move on and do different things. And I think his marriage broke up at the same time, and a lot of things in his personal life and his professional life. Musically, his heart was in the Shakti band. And so he took us aside, I think it was November or December of that year, and said, I don't want to continue this anymore. I want to go ahead with my acoustic Indian thing. And we all congratulated him, thanked him for the journey, and went our separate ways. But I had heard several Shakti concerts. It wasn't called Shakti at the time.
Remember what it was called?
I don't remember what it was called. I don't know that they had a group name, but I've been to several concerts. I had met El Shankar at the time, the wonderful violinist, and Zakir I had met. And I had been to a concert that John had promoted with Shankar and his 2 brothers, the violin trio with the incredible mridanga player, Palgad Mani Iyer, when John promoted a tour for them in the United States, and I heard him in New York, and it was incredibly unbelievable. One of the highlights of my life to hear that concert. The 3 brothers all playing in unison, maybe in different octaves, and incredibly intricate, and the incredible percussion. This guy, you've heard him, right? It just unbelievable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, Subramaniam, you recorded a record with him and Larry Coryell.
Yes, I did. And John and Shankar introduced me to his brother, L. Subramaniam, who at the time was teaching in Cal Arts in California. And we hit it off musically, and I wrote some tunes and he wrote one, and we went to Germany to record this album. And Larry came, Larry played guitar on it. Yeah, it was.
That's a really cool record, and certainly you were challenged keyboard wise to perform on that record, isn't that right?
Well, it was my record, so yeah,
Yeah.
of course. I played piano. I had several piano solos, one really challenging one in 7, which isn't that easy to do solo when nobody's keeping time. But it was an absolute blast. It was so much fun. It was my album. I put a lot of energy and a lot of time into it, and very, very proud of it.
Yeah, that's a very cool record.
And Larry, I had met touring Europe. How does this go? I was given some opportunity. I was in Alphonse Mouzon's band, who sadly passed a couple of years ago. But and through Alphonse, we played all these festivals. I met all kinds of people, and Larry played a bunch of festivals as a soloist in Europe. And we met and hung out. And Larry and I share a teacher. He had lived some years in Seattle, and years before I was studying with him, Jerry Gray, Larry did. So Larry and I had a bunch of stuff in common, and we hit it off right away. And we hung out and we played a couple of gigs together at the Village Gate duo in New York, and we played some festivals in Europe. And so I felt really comfortable inviting Larry to play on my first solo album, and having Al Subramaniam there as well.
It's an interesting choice for your first solo album.
Yeah, it was a blast. Yeah, it was very unusual instrumentation, no drums, no bass. And I wrote this huge orchestral introduction to the first tune on the album, which Subramaniam overdubbed 1,000 times. Tuning his violin down at the cello range and everything else.
Oh, really? That's sweet.
I mean, he had lower strings he had thicker strings to begin with, because they tune differently on Indian violin. The low G string was an E or an E flat, or even a D flat. So it wasn't that far to tune down to get some of the notes.
So he was tuned down almost a fifth already?
Well, they traditionally play, when they play in Shakti, Shankar tuned his violin to an E, like E, B, E, B, E below middle C.
Yeah.
Because the guitar is in E, so they would play in E. But traditionally in Indian music, a lot of times C sharp is the key. In North Indian music, the sitar is usually in C sharp, and a lot of times in E flat. So it's flexible, but whatever that tonic is, that's it for the whole night.
You mentioned that Alphonse Mouzon passed within the last few years, and he's such an interesting figure. The first drummer in Weather Report. Yeah. And so much.
McCoy.
Pardon? And McCoy, yes.
He was a huge, played incredible with McCoy.
Right. So what was it like working with him? He's such a fantastic figure in the music.
Well, I mean, super flamboyant, over the top. He would dress like Superfly. Mm-hmm. He had this floppy hat, and he had these boots on with like 10-inch heels, and he was very flamboyant, a real ladies' man. Was way over the top, but incredible. I don't know how he played the drums with these big heels on. I don't even know how it's possible, but he did. And he could do a roll on his bass drum with one foot. I don't know how he did that. The guy he was a force of nature, and he had his cymbals way up high. It's like a lot of drummers have it set up comfortably so you can kind of hit everything without having to. He wanted to be physically challenged. He was incredibly great. And the first tour I did was with the great Gary Bartz on saxes. And, it was just so much fun for me. I kind of feel I had the privilege to play with all these guys who had played in Miles' band. I never played with Miles. I met him once, but I never played with him. But I got to play with John McLaughlin. I worked with Wayne Shorter. Miroslav, Gary Bartz. I mean, it was incredible. So Gary was an amazing musician, and Gary was more of a traditional kind of bebop, bluesy kind of a thing than Alphonse wanted it to be fusion. Alphonse wanted me to play like really aggressive Fender Rhodes, and Gary I think was more into a more traditional 60s type of thing. I mean, he played on a lot of Miles fusion things and all that.
He did, yeah.
For his own taste, I think he was more into the more traditional stuff. So it was interesting. I would often lay out behind Gary, and then Alphonse would look at me and say, "Come on, let's go, let's make it happen." So there's some videos of that band. It was a lot of fun.
So this was
played Moog and
sorry.
I also played Moog and electric and some acoustic piano as well in that band.
So is this sort of the interstice between the end of Mahavishnu and then the One Truth Band?
Yeah, I think my stint with the first stint with McLaughlin ended, I think, in December of '75, and this would have been the spring of '76,
yeah.
Something like that.
Okay, and then when did you end up doing the John McLaughlin electric guitarist album? That was like 77, 76.
Wasn't it 77 or 78?
Yeah.
I'd have to look at the. That was a weird thing. I was living in LA. I mean, I kept my place in LA through all those years, even though I was on the road all the time. I rigged up a mail chute so my mail would come in the slot. I'd come home and I'd have a pile up to the ceiling. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And I had heard a rumor that McLaughlin was in town recording with Chick Corea and Stanley Clark and Jack DeJohnette for that album, the Johnny McLaughlin electric guitarist, his version of Giant Steps that he wrote. Do you hear the voices you left behind? And I went to that session just to hang out, because I'm friendly with them and all that. So I didn't interfere with anybody, but I was just hanging out there. And John was very gracious, as he always is. I had no idea I was going to play on that album. And I think he was originally trying to get David Sanchez to do the part that I did. For whatever reason, he was unavailable. And I got another one of these late night calls, come tomorrow to New York. Your ticket's waiting at the airports. And I went, of course I went. And it was on the red eye. And I showed up at whenever 6, 7 in the morning, went straight to SIR. I'm sorry, went straight to the recording studio. And there was Billy Cobham and Jerry Goodman and Fernando Saunders on bass, and I played keyboards and on a tune that I'd never seen before, and side read it on the album.
New York on My Mind.
Yeah, and it was super fun. And I think based on my performance on that, I got the call to join the One Truth Band when John started that up.
So that's the first time that I saw John live. So I would have been 15, and One Truth Band came around, and there were 2 area shows. There was Morristown, New Jersey, and I guess the Beacon. And the opening group was Brand X.
Okay, I remember those shows. Yeah.
And wow, the first lineup of One Truth Band, Sunship on drums and T.M. Stevens on bass with you, John, and Shankar.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, as a drummer, Sunship, what a special drummer and musician.
He was way out there. I mean, even by today's standards. He had all this, and I'm not disrespecting him, but I didn't have any understanding for what he was into. But he was reading all these wacky books and had all these wacky philosophies, and he would be playing the drums and doing stuff, and then he would start chanting and had these weird incantations and like magical shamanistic incantations, and he was a very fascinating figure. Yeah,
also I'd spent time in Weather Report and Charles Lloyd and so many great jazz groups. So how was that band formed? Did you just show up and those guys were already there, or what was happening?
I'm trying to remember. At one time, John was kind of uncertain who his rhythm section would be, and he knew he wanted me, and he was trying different people out. And
were there other people when you were
starting?
starting?
Yeah, there were other people. There were several incarnations of that band.
Oh, who would that be first?
I don't remember exactly. Sorry,
Yeah,
pal.
that's okay.
But there were a lot of people that came through that band until it settled, and then later Tony Smith and Fernando Saunders were in the band. But Sunship and T.M. Stevens was very flamboyant, amazing musician and showman. Very different than normally what you would expect on a McLaughlin show.
Yeah, I remember it. And I remember Sunship's solo very well, where he was chanting and reciting poetry while he was playing. The lighting inside of his drums and painting all over the kit, and just fascinating. And I was surprised really that John had hired him. But how long did that version of the band tour?
I'm sorry, pal. I don't really remember. Everything's kind of a fog. We did so many things. I don't really remember.
And then when did you record Electric Dreams? Did the lineup with Tony and Fernando?
That was with Tony and Fernando, and Illyrio Lima on percussion.
Another Weather Report guy. And did that group tour before recording, or?
I believe we did. I don't think we just met in the studio. I think we must have been touring before. Yeah. And Tony and Fernando were, of course, very tight because they played with Jan's band. So they were like completely in lockstep. Incredible, beautifully in sync. And they were totally ready when they came into the band, totally ready to tear it up. And they did. They did every time.
Yeah, Tony, what a wonderful drummer Tony Smith is. And of course, I saw him with the Jan Hammer group, and then I saw you guys doing the Electric Dreams stuff at the Beacon. And I remember John's banjo solo on Electric Dreams. And that was such a different thing for John. And so what was that like for you recording Electric Dreams?
I loved it. It was great. I mean, I had now really settled into the keyboard chair. So I was, I had more say in how the music went, and I had a lot of arranging ideas and a lot of things. John had me write a string arrangement and do different things, and it was very fulfilling. I loved it.
Yeah, that was a great album, and there's some really cool stuff on that album in terms of John reaching back and doing another one of his sort of Coltrane things with the Dark Prince.
Oh yeah, loved that. That was super fun. And we later performed that when we did a tour in Europe with not the One Truth Band. It was an equally built quartet with John and Billy Cobham and Jack Bruce and myself. And we did that as a trio, and I played the organ left-handed bass. Well, I remember do Dark Prince super fast.
Well, and then you also did left-hand bass on Do You Hear the Voices?
In that band.
Not
on record. Yeah. We probably did.
I remember because it wasn't TM playing the bass part, it was you playing the bass part.
Oh, in the One Truth Band.
Yeah.
Did we? I don't remember that. Oh, it could have happened.
Yeah. Well, that's why you needed a guy, who had a left hand.
Well, it was always fun. I always loved organ. Even as a teenager, I played more organ than piano as a teenager. So I loved organ.
Yeah, well, your chops were fully on display in the Dark Prince, that's for sure.
Oh, thanks, pal.
That's a famous solo now.
Thank you.
So around this time also you're getting ready to do Fancy Glance, is that right?
Fancy Glance wasn't anything we got ready for. That was something put together on a weekend.
Was it?
Yeah. There was a record producer in southern Germany just had this idea and called us up. We were all on tour. John Lee and Jerry Brown. John Lee, the bassist, Jerry Brown, the great drummer. They were playing in some band and I was playing somewhere else. And the guy had the idea to put, actually, I remember now, it was supposed to be John Sermon's album. And for whatever reason, he didn't show up, or he canceled, or I don't know what. And they said, oh, now we got only these three guys. What are we going to do? And it said, oh, we'll put together an album for you. And we did. And I brought in some tunes. John had some tunes, and we just put it together over a weekend, or just very few days in Munich. So it wasn't anything anyone planned for.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Uh, and then, I got to tell you, I've been listening recently to Eye of the Beholder.
Hmm.
What a piece of work that is. The arranging alone, I find, is really stunning on that record. And those are all your string arrangements, right?
Yeah, those are my tunes, my arrangements. Thank you. That's nice of you to say.
Oh, it's a cool record. The just the range of material on it, uh, sort of funky Jarrett kind of stuff, but then also beautiful ballad stuff. And I guess for me, like that was the one that really made me say, "Oh, Stu Goldberg," because I had the Subramaniam I remember as a kid, and I don't think we even heard Fancy Glance at that time.
Probably didn't come out of the States. I
Right.
don't know if it did or it didn't, but it certainly didn't at that time.
What was Eye of the Beholder a kind of breakthrough for you?
I wanted it to be. It never really became anything.
Uh,
They re-released it a couple years ago on CD for the first time. And I re-recorded some of those tunes on some of my later albums just because I felt they were important and they hadn't really been heard. So I re-recorded them in a quartet format. But with the strings and all that, that only came out on that album, and it didn't really do much, unfortunately. But yeah, I felt very strongly about it also.
oh, it's a very powerful record. And I think it shows off your musicality in so many different ways that maybe previously we hadn't really heard.
Oh, thanks, son.
And also right around that time, we're mentioning drummers that we lost recently. We recently lost Jon Christensen.
Yeah, what a wonderful man. And I had the honor of having him in my trio in Europe. We did a couple tours. I did three trio tours in Europe with Paul Danielson on bass. And the first one was with the great French drummer, Daniel Humer, left-handed drummer.
Love him, yeah.
What a poet on the drums, incredible. And then Polly introduced me to Yoon, and Yoon joined the band, and we did 2 tours, and we did a live album. And what a wonderful man, a wonderful drummer, so musical. Just he made everything feel good.
Yeah. And of course, all over those ECM records, and everyone knows him from his work with Keith Jarrett.
Oh yeah.
And that must have been wonderful for you. Was that acoustic piano strictly for you?
Strictly acoustic piano, not one note of electric ever. Strictly acoustic piano, mainly my tunes. Polly and I were really compatriots musically. We met, I was doing a solo piano tour of Scandinavia, and we met somewhere in Sweden. He's Swedish. And we played, and the guy has the most uncanny ear. I've never played with someone with an ear like that. I mean, I would throw in a substitution, some wacky note, and then he would put in a wacky bass note, and then I would change, and he would change, and pretty soon we were both in another key, but together. And we would modulate and do all kinds of, he heard everything. I've never seen it. And it used to kill him when we would be playing somewhere and the piano would be out of tune. He couldn't stand it because he had incredible perfect pitch. And it used to drive him absolutely nuts. So I started bringing a tuning hammer on the road, and I had tune up before every gig just so that Polly wouldn't make faces to me. But what an amazing musician. And he and Yoon were so tight from all those ECM things and playing with Keith and everything else. And I was so fortunate to have them. It was really a wonderful experience. And I'd love to be super honest. I'd love just playing acoustic.
Yeah.
Not having to plug anything in, just show up to the gig, the piano's there. Sometimes the pianos weren't the best, but just the idea of not having to hump gear all the time. There's one famous story when we were on one of the tours, and we were going from Denmark to Sweden, and we came over on the hydrofoil, and I got through customs. In those days, I was a little reckless. I didn't have any work permits or anything. I was traveling as a tourist, but I was actually working. So I got in the country, no problem. And then I went back over the line to help Yoon carry his drums. And that was a mistake, because then the customs guy said, "Hey, are you a tourist or are you working here?" And I tried to say something, hum, and they locked me up in a holding cell for long enough so that I couldn't get back on the hydrofoil and get a visa in Denmark. and I ended up canceling 2 gigs. And they wrote a big headline in the Swedish paper, American jazz pianist detained and whatever. And we rescheduled the gigs; they were sold out. So it was actually a blessing in disguise.
I remember touring and not telling them that I was working. I remember all that.
Oh yeah, I was stupid. I'll tell you a funny story. I had one of these 48-page passports that was completely full of all kinds of stamps. And, every time you went to Berlin, in those days, it was the Iron Curtain in the East Germany and West Germany. Anytime you went to Berlin, you would get 4 stamps in your passport when you went by car, because you had to drive from West Germany to the East Germany over back to Berlin, which was West, and then the same thing in reverse. You get 4 stamps. And the East were very proud of their stamp. It took up a whole page. And anyway, it looked very sinister. Every time I crossed the border after that, I had like 30 pages of East German stamps, and they thought I was a spy, and it was terrible. So one time I took my passport, and I took all the little crayons and stuff from my kids who were very young at the time, and scribbled all in the passport and cut it up, mutilated it with scissors and stuff, and drove to the U.S. Embassy in Bonn and told them that my kids had mutilated my passport. And the lady looked at it and said, "Oh, they certainly have. Well, we'll give you a new one. We'll get it in an hour." And I got a brand new 48-page. I mean, it's completely illegal. I hope the statute of limitations has expired. But in any case,
you're crafty.
I got a brand new blank passport, so that was cool.
So Stu, you're a very busy, in-demand, well-known soundtrack composer now, and have been for many years, working on The Amazing Race and Rescue 911 and countless films. One of my biggest inspirations is the composer Jerry Goldsmith. You had the opportunity to record as a session musician on his soundtrack to Inner Space. And I was wondering if you had any contact with him, if you got to see him work.
I didn't know him well personally. I met him at that session. I was, like you, a huge fan for years. And what a master. And, we can get into a whole conversation about my experiences in LA. I don't know how deep you want to go into it.
I'm curious about that, because you're also there when it's still full, sessions and large ensembles and all that.
I was so blessed to be able to work with all these wonderful composers in their prime, doing their finest work. And I got to be part of the orchestra and work with John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith and Lalo Schifrin and all these masters, and see how they work and see how they deal with similar situations and solve problems in their own personal ways. But it was the best education anyone aspiring to be a film composer could ever have, that I was afforded just by luck. I just lucked into it. I mean, I worked hard to get in those sessions, but to be able to sit in the orchestra, for example, in John Williams, and occasionally there'd be a cue where I wouldn't play on, and I could walk around and hear and look at the parts of the other players, and I hear these amazing dissonances, and I'd say, how does he do that? This was on the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. How does he do that? And I would walk around and I'd look at the trumpets, and they're like playing C major triad, perfectly in tune with each other. And then I go over to the clarinets, and they're playing C sharp major, half step away. But in their section, they were perfectly in tune. But when you hear the thing together, it wasn't a cacophony. It was like amazingly resonant and dissonant at the same time, because every section was grounded and in tune with itself, but in a complete other key. And it was, what a master. And he would write this stuff on the violin for the violin section that most guys wouldn't dare write for a soloist. And he would write like things all over the place. And I mean, sextuplet, triplets, all up and down the fingerboard, incredible lines. And I think what he was going for was kind of a nervousness and a movement and an edge that you could only get from fear. And all these guys are scuffling, trying to play this almost unplayable part. And nobody would, like I say, no one would dare write that for a soloist. And he had 50 guys doing it.
You know,
And it sounded amazing. And the effect that it created for the audience was this on the edge of your seat, like what's going to happen next. And it was so exciting because of the because of the energy that the players had to put into it to even cover it. Amazing writing. Anyway, Jerry Goldsmith on Inner Worlds. He had a huge orchestra. I mean, he was in a very high stage of his career at this point and basically could get anything he wanted. I think he had over 100-piece orchestra. And he was very innovative, experimental, using electronics with the orchestra and all kinds of custom patches that he made and developed. And he was like deep into it. And
I want to hear about that because, you know, as I've mentioned on this program before, the Planet of the Apes soundtrack changed my life.
Oh, yeah.
I heard it in the theater at the age of 4 when it came out.
Yeah.
My mom thought it was a nature documentary. So I was exposed to atonality,
yeah,
far-reaching percussion writing, and
Emil Richards.
Emil Richards all over it. Right?
Became a wonderful friend and was very helpful to me when I first moved to LA. He turned me on to a lot of people and helped me a lot in my career. Emil is all over that Planet of the Apes. I mean, he had all these cool innovations that he brought to it, and like playing on salad bowls,
mixing balls. Yeah.
Yeah, the guy was. I mean, what a fantastic. He passed last year, unfortunately. But
another great that we lost recently. Yeah. And then, of course, electronic processing is on that record.
Yeah, yeah.
So I know that that Goldsmith really was innovating. What was some of the electronic stuff going on in the one you worked on in Inner Space?
You know, I'm trying to remember. It was like, it's a little bit of a blur because it was in those days we did sessions every day with all kinds of different composers, and I was one of probably 4 keyboardists. And each one of us had a big rack of refrigerator-sized things that we brought in. We all had different parts to play, and I was one of, you know, at least 3 guys, and maybe 4. One guy would play only piano and celeste, and then there would be a bunch of synth players. So it was like almost like a synth section.
What are your favorite Goldsmith soundtracks?
Oh man, there's so many. I mean, the Patton thing, of course.
I was hoping you would say Patton. It's so great.
Islands in the Stream, this wonderful augmented major 7 arpeggiated theme that he had through there. I so love that. And Rudy, and there's so many. I mean, I don't know how many scores did he do? Like over 100.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And each one is its own world. Each one is true to itself and has its own language and its own. I mean, the guy was so creative.
And Lalo Schifrin.
Yeah, Lalo. I did one. It was called. God, what was it called? I can't remember. It was a crime. It was a crime thing. Yeah, he was wonderful, and what an inspiration, and he total master. I'm not so masterful. I can't remember the name of the movie.
But this is sort of like a masterclass period for you because you're seeing these guys work and do it and make it happen.
Well, we're going a little bit backwards. See, I was living in Europe for the better part of 10 years, touring as a jazz musician, making my jazz albums and touring. After all my work with McLaughlin, I went on and had a solo career as a solo pianist and had this trio from time to time, making my records. And then at one point I got married, had kids, and said, you know, this being on the road 200 days of work a week isn't 200 days a year isn't going to work when I want to be an effective parent. So I said, what can I do in music and be home more? And I said, I'll become a film composer. I had confidence in my writing. I didn't realize politically how hard that was. So we were living in Germany at the time, and we moved everybody to LA where I knew nobody. And I had been performing solo piano concerts in the same venues that Pollini and Rubinstein were playing on, big, beautiful pianos, 9-foot pianos, gorgeously tuned with no microphones, and playing these beautiful places for 3,000 to 5,000 people every night. And it came to LA and knew nobody, and nobody knew me, and nobody cared. Anything I had done in my life prior to that meant nothing in LA.
In that world, yeah.
Nothing. I was a complete novice. Nobody wanted to know me or anything that I did. Didn't know anybody in LA and had aspirations to become a film composer. And I realized very early that was never going to happen quickly. So I started hanging out with musicians and going to recording sessions and seeing what the keyboard players were doing. And I bought myself a DX7, which I didn't have at the time. It had just come out. This was 84, 85. And spent all night, every night with headphones on, learning how to program and learning all the ropes and all the different things, which wasn't particularly daunting because of my earlier experience with synth, but it was different because now it was a different synth generation, algorithms and all that stuff that I wasn't used to. I had to learn that particular technology. And I started going to these sessions, and I would hang out with people and try to get gigs as a session player. And eventually I started getting them. And, I had to bone up on my sight reading chops because it's all about sight reading in the studio. It's about feel and sight reading. You got to be able to read it and play it and make it sound believable instantly. There's very few rehearsals, if any. The red light is on because it's too expensive. So that was a great proving ground. And I got a lot of sessions, and I took my interest in technology and built one of the first MIDI studios in LA.
Oh.
This was in the middle 80s. And I had a little 16-track recorder, and I had a U-matic video player and I had all this in those days you needed very expensive gear to sync audio with video, which I had. And I had one of the first sequencers, and I got into the computers and learned how to program and all this stuff. So I was ready. So I was doing these dates with all these composers, and a lot of times the budget would run out before the score was done. And now what am I going to do the things due tomorrow, and I haven't finished it? And I would go up to the composer after things and say, hey man, I'll help you finish it. Let's go to my place and we'll do it in MIDI. And people took me up on that offer, and I found out I was good at it. And I became a really good score reader and understander of what they were doing and how to realize a score electronically, which was new at the time. And this grew into becoming a ghostwriter, which I did that for the better part of 15 years. And I was ghostwriting for everybody, and which was an amazing learning experience because I had to learn how to write in the style of anybody that would come to me. I would have to, make what I was writing sound just like theirs and have continuity for the score and make sense with the picture in the style of whatever that guy would do. And I became good at it, and it was a great learning experience. And topping that off with working with the masters like Jerry Goldsmith and John Williams, I got the education of how the masters write for a big orchestra, and then we were all discovering what you could do electronically with the synths and in the sequencers. So developing that language and learning the orchestral language was it helped me a lot later when I became a composer, when I started getting gigs on my own.
Yeah, and clearly yet another area that you had to innovate in to be a musician and to make a living.
Yeah, it's a whole nother thing. It's definitely a whole nother thing. I was really blessed. One of my composers that I helped out for years, Richard Stone, who unfortunately passed some years ago, incredibly gifted and talented. He got this TV series, Rescue 911, with William Shatner. It was the first reality show. And I helped him set up his little MIDI studio. He didn't play keyboards. He had played some cello. He was a composer. And, but he got this gig that required him to play keyboard and run this thing. So I helped him set up a studio, and I helped him with some of the shows. And he threw some shows to me when he was busy. His dream was to write for cartoons, which he got to do. And brilliant writer, incredible. He single-handedly revitalized the Carl Stalling era at Warner Brothers when they did Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, and all these shows. That was him.
Wow.
Brilliant guy. We did a series, Tasmania, that was 65 shows or so, and I played synth, and we had a core group of 5 live musicians, and the rest was all sequenced with synthesizer. And we did it every week, and they would come and take my rig over to the bring it to the studio, and I'd hook it up with the sequencer, and I generated clicks, played piano live, and ran the sequence. And then they had 5 soloists who played on top of the sequences. And the composers, there were like 6 or 7 composers on each episode. They would fax me their sketches, and I had to orchestrate and program everything every week with 23 minutes of music. It was a real challenge. I remember the first week, one of the composers, really great composer, he faxed me like at the 11th hour. Everyone would send everything late, and everybody thought only their thing mattered. So they would all send it late, and in 3 hours I had to be at the session. I never got to sleep the night before. So this guy sends over like 2 hours before the session, verbatim the score to the Ride of the Valkyries, Wagner, which is so many notes you've never even seen anything. It's like, the fly shit on the fly swatter. It was so deep and dense. And I got like an hour before the crew was coming to take my gear, and I had to program in all this. But it was a great experience. Anyway, Rich, who sadly passed, he gave me that show, Rescue 911. That was my start. I had been ghosting the show for him. I'd done, I don't know, 5 or 6 episodes prior. He wasn't allowed to say that he had help. He wanted to do his cartoons. He would go to the meetings, and he would demo the music for them. They would approve it. It would go in the show. It would everybody was happy, but they couldn't know that I wrote it. So when time came when he finally didn't want to do the show even on paper anymore, he told them, listen, I'm going to have to move on, but I really want you to hire this guy, me. And he recommended me, and still there was an audition. There was a cattle call. Everybody in LA tried out. In those days it was cassettes. Every month sent in a reel, cassettes. And they had, 100 submissions, including me. And on my submission, I only gave them cues that I had written that had already aired on the show. Nothing else, only stuff that they had already aired on their show. And I got a call a week later from the head producer, and he says, man, we listened to 100 tapes, and there was one that really stood out that sounded like our show. And I was kind of cocky, and I said, well, congratulations that you recognize your own music. Because that was your show.
That was your show.
Yeah. Anyway, luckily he had a sense of humor, because in Hollywood, being cocky is not always going to get you success. But this guy had a sense of humor. We had a good laugh, and he hired me, and I did it for 5 years. It was the best gig I ever had. I could thank Rich for
it. Like so many of us that do our own thing, you started your own label.
Yes.
And when did you do that?
That would have been in 2000, I think, when I did the Going Home album. Yeah, I wanted to have an outlet for my music. I wasn't I didn't want to have to rely on record companies and crooked record deals, and they don't help, and there's no support anyway. And it says, man, I've got the technology now. I can do it all I had a really good professional recording studio of my own for several years that I'd been using for the film scores, and some albums that I'd produced for other people. And I said, I want to produce my own album, and I don't want anyone to tell me what I'm going to put on it and what it has to be. And so I'll just make my own label. What the hell? I mean, might as well. So that's what I did.
And you've been releasing a lot of different kinds of things on that. One thing that you sent me some years ago was a piano violin duet.
Yeah.
With and if I'm saying the name wrong, I'm sorry, but Denis Letourneau?
Yeah, pronounced Denis.
Denis Letourneau.
French, but yeah.
And that was such an interesting sort of chamber project.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about that, because you studied classically when you were a youngster, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, I started the classical piano at 10, and I studied till I was 19.
So what were you bringing to bear when you're doing your form of chamber music?
Well, that particular project was interesting. We had just moved from LA in 2005. We moved up here to the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia, Canada. And Denis, I met, he was at the time the concertmaster of the local orchestra here, the Okanagan Symphony Orchestra. And we hit it off. And he said, let's get together and play some duets, play some chamber music. And I love chamber music. When I was in LA, I rehearsed, hadn't performed much, but rehearsed with some violinists in duets and a wonderful cellist. I had written some duets for cello and piano that we had performed and even recorded, but never released. Anyway, so Denis wanted to get together and play, and we started playing duets. We did Beethoven and Bach and Mozart, the wonderful, some beautiful violin piano sonatas from Mozart. And we went through the repertoire and did some concerts and things. And we even formed a trio with a modern dancer, ballet dancer, and she choreographed to some of the pieces, and it was really fun. And so I had the idea of writing these duets and making an album out of it. So that's what I wrote everything except for one piece we did of Rachmaninoff, a duet.
And that's the album Reiterations?
Reinventions.
Reinventions.
Yeah. And put it out on my label.
Yeah. So what else is on this label? What's your label called?
Dedication Records. So I've got my Going Home album with my quartet at the time, which included my brother Kenny, who plays saxes and flute, and Jeff Faulkner on bass and Dave Rennick on drums. And we did 2 albums on my label, the Going Home album and the Dedication album. And on both of those albums, we re-recorded some of those pieces from Eye of the Beholder, 20 years later at the time, which I thought was important to do. And I'm proud of the new versions. I still like the old versions, but the new versions are just with the quartet. And I wrote all original music, some new tunes, some old tunes, and recorded them. And yeah, that was those recordings. And then we did this album that you mentioned, Reinventions, when I moved up here to Canada. And a year later, I did a really cool project with Cassius Kahn and my daughter. Cassius is an incredibly talented tabla player who can also, he's got the unique distinction of being able to sing very complicated ragas and incredibly while playing tabla at the same time. And I don't think anybody else has ever done that. But the guy is like, he's not like some, you see some of the bhajan singers or some of the soloists in India, they'll accompany themselves on harmonium and kind of just ghost the notes and kind of play. Cassie's like blasting on the tabla, blasting and singing completely in another realm and blasting as a singer. I mean, the guy is incredible. And I met him a couple times in the little town where we were living in Canada and heard him play. And I was so impressed with him, and I invited him over to my studio one night after his gig, and we started playing, and it was so amazing. It was so magical. I said, "Shit!" And I turned the microphones on. I said, "Do you mind if I record this?" And because it's a recording studio, so I just turned, and we played for an hour. And I wanted to release it. I was so happy with it. I was so proud of it. It was so amazing. And Cassius said to me, "Come on, man, let's do it. Let's plan it and do it right, and we can do it so much better." So I said, "Okay, when?" He says, it's 2 months, I've got time, whatever. I said, "Okay, that's it. We'll plan it and we'll do it." So I organized a bunch of concerts in our local area to make it worthwhile for him to come out. He was living in Edmonton at the time, which is like 10-hour drive from where we are. So he came and we rehearsed not very long and recorded. In fact, the first tune on the album it's called Dark Clouds. It's on my label. And the first tune on the album is a total improvisation. And I think it's 21 minutes long or something. We went through, I don't know if you heard that, but I'm really proud of it. Just piano and tabla. I don't know if it hasn't been done much, but I don't know if it's been done at all. But in any case, it was very unique. And we had even more unique live performances of that unfortunately I don't have recorded, but we went on the road and really took that out. I mean, that 21 minutes became 45 minutes sometimes on some of the gigs. And he was gracious enough to allow me to duet with him on percussion. And I'm kind of an amateur percussionist. I don't really have any chops, but I studied with I had a wonderful tabla teacher in California, a disciple of Swapan Chowdhury, Austin Wrinkle, and I studied tabla diligently with him for 3 years before we moved up.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
I never got my chops up really, but I just wanted to honor that I wanted to honor that tradition by trying to play it. And then I met Cassius, and he came and played on my tabla and said, "That's it. This guy is so far beyond anything I'll ever be able to accomplish." I said, "You play the tabla, and I'll play the piano." But he did let me, so I did some percussion things. We have a duet on that album, and we did a bunch of things live. There's a video on my website of us where we did some conical rhythmic exchanges and things, and it was super, super fun. I mean, just pure joy. Anyway, that's on that label.
You're
I'm digressing.
East Meets West is alive.
Yeah, it was definitely alive. And it was fun to play on piano, tempered scale and all that, and have him play on the tabla. So we did a thing. The heart of that album is the first improvisation, and then a second one at the end where he does a whole introduction singing with my daughter, who's a singer. And I ended up orchestrating it with the singers, and we overdubbed, 20 times, and there's like a whole choir. And it really turns into a cool thing. And I play piano and they sing. And then he has this awesome tabla solo in the middle. And then we do this rhythmic thing at the end. So that was really, really a fun project, the Dark Clouds project. Yeah,
I highly recommend Dark Clouds to fans of the Indian fusion movement. There's certainly a lot going on there. And you've mentioned that you've been recording with your daughter, and I think you've done several things with her.
I've done a ton of stuff with her. I mean, her debut was on Dark Clouds, but she's been a backup singer in my studio for years. Mm-hmm. I've coached her for years, and she's become very adept at singing harmonies and being able to sing overdub to herself with complex intervals and all that kind of stuff, and really good at it. And she's a songwriter. And for years, she's actually quite big in Europe in the electronic dance music scene. She does these electronic dance things, and producers from all over the world send her their instrumental tracks. And there's always a space in the middle of the song where it becomes a ballad for like 30 seconds. And they play some pretty chords, and they need someone to come up with a melody and lyrics, and she writes a song out of it. So they collaborate in that way, and she sings over it and does beautiful singing and lyrics and vocals. So I produced that for her, and she's done, 50 or 60 releases in electronic music, electronic dance music genre, trance they call it. So she's done a whole bunch of those, and she's got 2 records of hers that I produced. And then recently we did this collaboration that is just out, Return to Me, that we just released on my label, which is her original songs writing in a kind of a Celtic inspired vein. She's fascinated with Ireland and Scotland and the Celtic music and all that kind of stuff. So we tried to do it as much as we could orchestrally and acoustically with vocals and orchestra. So that's what that just came out recently, and it's doing quite well actually. So I'm proud of her. It's very proud of what we accomplished musically and what she did, and how the album is doing.
And of course, it's got to be an incredible thrill to make music with your kid.
Oh, of course. I mean, we spent 2 years making that album. And it's a lot of work. I mean, especially when there's only 2 people, and like I was all the instruments and she's all the vocals, and some of it has very intense choirs and very deep complicated background parts and all that stuff. And we worked intently for 2 years on it.
What is her name?
Her name is Jennifer Lauren, and her stage name is Amoria, Emoiryaah.
Amoria.
Yeah, there were 3 other Jennifer Lawrence who were singer-songwriters, and every time you typed it into Google,
Yeah.
all the other ones would come up. So she made up this name, Amoria, that means star of the sea.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah. So, and she's had quite success with it.
So I was fascinated to see that you recently composed a guitar concerto.
Yeah. That was a commission. Wonderful local guitarist here, William Leggett. He had this dream he wanted to write a guitar concerto, and he wanted to solo and perform in his own concerto. And he had a music store for years, and he would do local gigs and little gigs on the side, but he was never free to go get out on tour because he was tied down to this music store. So he had just sold the music store, and he came to me. He says, now I want the second chapter of my life, and I want to do this guitar concerto, and I want to write it, and I want it to be fantastic, but I need some help with it. So he came to me, and he brought, I said, bring everything you have, and let's go through it and see what there is. And he wanted my help in organizing what he had written. So we went through 80 pages of scribbles up and down and sideways, and went through it and spent like a few days going through everything. And there were a few little themes there that I thought would be useful, and the rest we couldn't really use. So I ended up writing 80%, 90% of it. The whole second movement is me. We had nothing for the second movement. The first movement, the theme that he plays is from him, and all the orchestra and everything else is from me. And the third movement, he had a kind of a fast section that he had some ideas that he had started, and I finished them. And then did the whole orchestra, wrote all the orchestra parts, and wrote a big cadenza for him, and a slow section, and then back to the little part that he wrote. So fantastic experience, and all written for acoustic orchestra and scored for live orchestra. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a premiere performance yet because of COVID. So I did a really good MIDI recording of it.
Yeah, the MIDI recording is cool.
It's not bad. I mean, considering it doesn't help to have all those years of scoring the films under my belt. So I know how to make the MIDI thing work as best as you can. It's still MIDI, but it's a pretty good approximation of what it'll be like with the real orchestra. And then, of course, the guitar part is live.
Yes. What do you have going on these days, Stu?
I've been scoring a lot. I've had the COVID, of course, put the brakes on everything for everybody in every aspect of music. And so the first few months of 2020 there wasn't much going on for me. But later they started producing again in Vancouver. And the end of the year was just a whirlwind for me. I mean, in 5 weeks, I scored 3 films and an animated short. A lot of music. I wrote 5 hours of, probably 5 hours of music in 5 weeks for big orchestra.
That's a huge amount of work.
It's a huge amount of work, and it's I've developed a muscle over the years. When there's a deadline and when things have to happen, and I've got to make it happen, I can do it. And I realize that, and I don't abuse it. I don't write much between gigs. I want to keep that inspiration for when I really need it, and it's got to happen. And I've fortunately to this point never had writer's block. I can always go to this well when I need to do it. That's when I'm making an album, or when I'm doing my film music, or producing someone else, or whatever. I've always got this well that I can go to. So far, that's been really, really a blessing.
It is incredible to think. I'm happy to say I have a similar situation in that I can't get to everything that I'm thinking of compositionally. There's just too many things. And it comes from I think a lifetime of feeding your creative zone, with other people's great work, the people that inspire you, and also going outside of music. So, you're talking about a visual medium. I've always found visual stimulus to be the best inspiration for music for me. even outside of just listening to other people's music. I kind of don't want to write music that's only about music. I like it to kind of have a bigger connection to sound and art and other means. So yeah, I can't say I've had trouble ever coming up with stuff, and writer's block, luckily, have not run into that. And also I think being able to write in a lot of different genres, a lot of different styles, so you don't get tired of it, you don't get bored. So like you've mentioned earlier with Goldsmith, I've always tried to approach every piece as its own universe. And I think that's something that we have to do as working composers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in my business, in the field business, you have to, and the music is it's an accompaniment to what you see on the screen. So it's got to enhance and bring something to it that makes sense. It can't just be, it can never be its own thing for its own sake. You're always, a collaborator in a large group of people creating stuff. So that's, I really do love it, other than I make a living doing it, which is good, because as a jazz musician, it's tough, man. There's no gigs anymore. I mean, to be totally frank, of all the things I do, I probably enjoy the most performing live. If I had my druthers, if somebody said you could tour forever and play for 5,000 people every night and play your own music and have fun like I used to, I'd probably do that. But it just isn't a reality anymore, at least not for me. So I love the film music. I love collaborating with other artists, and I love working in the studio. I have a blast. It's really fun to help other artists bring their projects to fruition. I've worked with a lot of singers and a lot of instrumentalists. I have a ball. I love producing and helping people realize their dreams. I just think it's a blast.
Yeah, and you've been doing it and very successfully, and that's been really cool to see, Stu, because I know that just trying to be a jazz musician these days is so tenuous and difficult. I want to thank you for taking the time to talk today. This has been such a pleasure to chat with you.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's wonderful to see you in the flesh. We've been for years, but no, this is cool. And I recognize your room now because I saw some of your videos.
Yeah, this is my my safe space.
Cool.
This is my my place that I can feel comfortable and create in and be attached to things that I love. And I think we all need that, It's StuGoldberg.com, STU Goldberg. And all of his stuff is on there. You can connect with all of these different projects we've been talking about today. You can find Stu's releases there. And anything else you would like to plug, Stu?
Oh, no, this is great. I've been long enough.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it, and pleasure conversing with you, and great respect for everything you're doing, pal. I heard some of your music and been watching you over the years. Good for you. Keep it going. Stay safe there, man. It's tough in the States. I've been hearing about how awful it is. Yes,
but we are safe here in New Jersey, and my family is safe, and we're all trying to stay positive and creative.
Fantastic.
So my guest has been musician Stu Goldberg, and I thank Stu for taking the time to chat and reminisce a little bit. Thank you all for supporting the program. We've had incredible response over the last about 6 months now that we're going into 2021 now. And please like and subscribe so that we can keep doing this. And we are still on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well as YouTube. So that's fantastic. And thank you, Stu Goldberg. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Okay. Take care, pal.
Bye-bye.